Good morning, Dan and Amy. And I mentioned before Mike Scott's newscast that Biden administration expected to announce plans to reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse gases by 50% from 2000 levels by 2030 and have a net zero carbon economy by 2050. The Chinese, I was watching this interview that Tom Friedman from state media called the New York Times was giving to state-run media in China, where they were arguing about who is more aggressive in pursuing a net zero economy, with the Chinese state media person saying China, and Tom Friedman suggesting that, if you're continuing to build coal power plants, that maybe you're not as aggressive. And then we have all these 2030, 2050 projections, and the Chinese and the Americans go back and forth, and it provides cover for each party to do nothing. I suppose the predicate question is this a worthy endeavor in the first place, this sort of industrial policy? To help us answer that question, we're pleased to be joined again by Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, author of Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Patrick, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Nice to be back with you, Dan.
And so, what about that? This, I'll see your 2050 and raise you a 2030. Is there a substantive point to this when it comes to preserving the planet and being responsible ecologically?
Well, let's say right off the bat, China's not doing a darn thing. They're just building more coal plants. I don't understand why the United States would pretend that China intends to do anything. At the same time, the U.S. and many of the Western countries are promising not to have an industrialized policy, but a deindustrialized policy to basically gut the entire economy of all of our countries. Because a 50% reduction in fossil fuels is basically a 40% reduction in the entire energy system, which is what makes everything work and what makes factories go, what makes cars go, what makes trains go and planes go and everything else. So Fake Invisible Catastrophe, Threats of Doom addresses this by saying this whole thing is fake to begin with. The idea that carbon dioxide is going to cause any problem whatsoever, when in fact it is what is making our food crops and forests grow better than they ever have in human civilization in the last 10,000 years or more. They're growing better now. CO2 is the food for life. And I may not get a Nobel Prize for it, but I know, like in physics, in science, the unified field theory is kind of the holy grail, where maybe one day they'll find something that explains the whole ball of wax. Well, I have definitely discovered the unified theory of scare stories, and that is that every single one of them is based on something either invisible or so remote no one can check it for themselves. CO2 is invisible. Radiation is invisible. The non-existent thing in GMOs that's supposed to be bad is invisible. The Pacific garbage patch is invisible and fake. The remoteness of polar bears and coral reefs and the fact that they are an icon of beauty and wildlife and all that makes them a perfect subject for a fake scare story, because no one can check it for themselves. There you go. That is the unified theory of scare stories.
It's interesting because you have some retrenchment going on in the scientific community. Holman Jenkins had a piece over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal about a physicist named Steve Koonin, who was in the Obama Energy Department and is now sort of walking back some of the apocalyptic claims that are being made, or certainly suggesting that they shouldn't be taken as gospel. And you've had some other scientists in this area doing the same. What's going on there? Is there really an appreciation by some, or did the fountain of courage get discovered in the scientific community, where we're going to actually go back to sort of the scientific method and going back to the fundamentals, if you will, in terms of making pronouncements about what is happening on the planet and the threats that we face?
Yes, Dan. Steve Koonin is an excellent scientist. I've met him back in the day. I just saw him come back out again in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm really pleased with that because he has a lot of influence. And you know, the CO2 Coalition, of which I'm a founding director, Will Happer and Dick Linson were really the main thrust behind starting it in 2015, and we are having some influence now. Will Happer has and Dick Richard Linson, that is, have just published a new paper on how CO2 is nowhere near as big a problem from a greenhouse gas perspective. In fact, it might cause a little bit of warming, but that will be positive. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of warming. People don't realize that, number one, we're living in a very cold period in terms of the history of life right now. It's called the Pleistocene Ice Age. We happen to be in an interglacial period, which is a little warmer than the coldest it gets, but it's still cold compared to the last 150, 200 million years or so. And we're also in a CO2 drought. CO2 has gone down to the lowest levels in Earth's history in recent times, like during the last major glaciation, and only came back up a little bit. And thankfully, we are now bringing about a balance to the global carbon cycle by putting some of the CO2 back in the atmosphere that the plants which made the fossil fuels took out back in the day, millions of years ago. People don't seem to realize that gas, oil, and coal were made from life. They were made by photosynthesis, by plants. They are not toxic poisons from Mars. The CO2 is the food of life, and all of life needs it to survive. Well, and so we need to turn the tables on this whole argument, Dan, and get back to real science like you're saying.
Well, what about electric cars? You know, having all electric cars, how is that going to affect Mother Earth?
It's going to affect Mother Earth by there's massive mining operations to get the materials for the batteries in this many cars, and the fact that we will probably have to nearly double our energy production. And there's no way that's going to, if we have a net zero fossil fuels, getting rid of 80% of the existing energy in the world. This whole thing, and I saw AOC on TV yesterday saying that climate change was racist, and climate change is infrastructure, and like they're mixing up all the words as if climate change is everything, and it's completely ridiculous. They've got to be stopped because what they are proposing would cause mass starvation and destruction of the Western world. That is just a fact. You cannot eliminate 80% of the society's energy and expect everybody to stay alive. You can't expect the farmers to be able to produce food, and you can't expect the trucks to be able to bring it into the cities where the people on the 30th floor of a condominium depend upon the stores being stocked at night while they're sleeping. So we got to get real here, Dan and Amy. I really believe this is true, and my book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, covers 11 different fake scare stories, all of which are completely fake. The Pacific Garbage Patch does not exist. It cannot be seen from anywhere, including outer space or from a jet plane. I mean, no one can see it from the land because it's supposed to be 1,000 miles out at sea, but it isn't even there. And that is how fake most of these stories are.
Now, I'm not a medical doctor, Patrick, but I wouldn't, for your own mental health, I would encourage you not to watch AOC on television. But the
very
news
good advice.
Yes, the news is not all good, though. Of course, you have some people, probably, and perhaps in a response to your coalition and scientists coming out and pumping the brakes a little bit. Of course, they go the opposite direction. They triple down on hysteria. So Mark Fischetti, writing in Scientific American, "We are living in a climate emergency, and we're going to say so." He writes, "Given the circumstances, Scientific American has agreed with major news outlets worldwide to start using the term climate emergency in its coverage of climate change. Climate change, the end of the world, that's not strong enough. Now the new vernacular is climate emergency. That's what they're going to rinse and repeat."
Well, actually, cities all over the world, in the West in particular, have already declared climate emergency. Hyperbole is not befitting of science. Science is supposed to be a sober pursuit looking at actual real things that exist, not at, fabricating like there's a siren needs to go off in every city to get everybody to have an emergency about the climate. There is no climate emergency. Otherwise, people would be running for the shelters. I mean, they are completely just unhinged. These so-called science magazines like Science, Scientific American, National Geographic, all went tabloid years ago. They are just a gossip column pretty much these days. And there is nothing to be said that is true about the term climate emergency. The climate today, if you look at the last 10,000 years of this Holocene interglacial period, absolutely nothing that is happening in the climate or in the weather today is anywhere near out of the ordinary with all of those thousands of years of climate and weather. Nothing. They are just using hyperbole and scare stories, which are fake. And that's why people got to read my book, because in plain language that your kids will understand if they're grade 8 or 9 or older, it's written for people who can read English, not for scientists. If I wanted to write a book for scientists, I might sell 25 of them. But this way, I'm trying to reach the general public with a book that explains to them how they can sit at the dinner table or go to a meeting of their peers or talk to their children about these issues in a sensible manner. And it's all there. And if you go on Amazon.com and read the reviews of my book, you will see one of the main points is it's understandable. And the other main point is that it exposes these scare stories for just what they are. You see, when you can't look at something yourself, like we can't see CO2 and say, look what it's doing over there. It's invisible. And so therefore we depend upon the activists, the media, the politicians, and the scientists on serial government grants who say the science is settled and then ask for more money because they need to study it more for some unknown reason. Those people are making billions of dollars with these scare stories. And the reason the scare stories work is because the average person cannot observe and verify the truth for themselves, because the scare stories are based on invisible and remote objects and subjects. So it's as simple as that. That is the unified theory of scare stories. And I believe it is going to prove out to be something that no one has ever really exposed before in a unified way like this. That they all have the same thing in common, is they can't be verified by the average person in the street or in the society, and therefore they can get away with making up these stories. They are fabricated stories. They are not true, and my book proves it by going right to the bottom of the whole thing.
It'd be nice if that your book, made its way into some classrooms around the country, too. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, author of Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Patrick, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to talk to you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey everybody, Jay Farner here, CEO of Rocket Mortgage and Rocket Companies. Last year we saw historically low mortgage interest rates. In fact, over 1 million homeowners took advantage of refinancing or buying a new home with Rocket Mortgage. What you may not know is that interest rates are already starting to increase again, and it's likely that trend is only going to continue. Our team of experts is standing by to help you save before rates go up. With an official mortgage review from Rocket Mortgage, you'll see just how much money you could save by making a move right now. Don't look back over these next few weeks and wish that you had taken action. You could save hundreds on your mortgage payments or pay off your home loan earlier than planned. You could even take cash out of your home